Maria stood at the bus stop, her fingers tightly clutching the crumpled envelope in her pocket. The letter inside was a reminder of everything she was fighting against. The system had failed her. The letter was a notice, eviction, the final blow to her already crumbling life. She had worked every day, scraped together every penny, but it was never enough. She had no family to turn to. The world seemed indifferent to her struggle. The bus arrived, but she didn't get on. Instead, she turned and walked towards the only place she felt she could find any answers, the welfare office. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she had no other choice. With each step, the weight of the injustice crushed her, but she couldn't stop moving. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her future, her dignity, and her chance to break free. The welfare office rejected her request, citing an overwhelming backlog. Maria left in a daze, the crushing weight of the rejection sinking deeper with every step. She had expected a battle, but not this. Her stomach churned with uncertainty. There was no help coming. She could feel the oppressive weight of the system bearing down on her, each failure reinforcing the belief that the odds were stacked too high against her. As she walked back into the busy streets, the noise of the city felt distant, muffled by her own thoughts. She had no idea what to do next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything she had fought for. Later that night, Maria sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by bills, eviction notices, and the remnants of her failed attempts to change her situation. The apartment was small, worn down by years of neglect. She looked around, trying to find a spark of hope, but all she saw was the same old cycle of poverty. The system was against her, but Maria wasn't the type to back down. She had never been given anything, and yet she had made it this far. She wasn't going to stop now. "There's got to be a way," she muttered to herself. Determination burned in her chest. She would find another way, even if it meant fighting harder than she ever had before. The following morning, Maria set out with a new plan. She couldn't rely on the system, so she would take matters into her own hands. She spent the day researching any program, any person who could help. Every door seemed to be locked, every option limited. But she wasn't deterred. At the end of the day, she had a handful of contacts, phone numbers, and addresses. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maria knew the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had a goal now, and nothing would stand in her way. The next week, Maria found herself standing in front of a small community organization, one of the few places that offered help. She took a deep breath before pushing the door open. Inside, the walls were plastered with flyers for assistance, and the room hummed with quiet conversation. Maria approached the desk, her heart pounding, but she didn't hesitate. She had come too far to turn back now. "I need help," she said, her voice steady but firm. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, she was fighting for her future. Maria spent the next few days following up on every lead she had gathered. She called every number, sent emails and visited offices, but each time she was met with disappointment. The system was slow, unyielding, and filled with red tape. Still, Maria refused to back down. She knew that the only way out was through. One afternoon, she received an email from a local activist group that offered free legal consultations for people in her situation. Maria's heart skipped a beat. This could be her chance. With renewed hope, she scheduled an appointment, praying this would be the breakthrough she desperately needed. The day of her appointment, Maria walked into the activist office with cautious optimism. She was greeted by a kind woman named Rachel, who immediately set Maria at ease with her warm demeanor. "Tell me your story," Rachel said gently. Maria hesitated for a moment, but then poured everything out: the struggle with eviction, the welfare office's rejection, and the daily fight to survive. Rachel listened intently, taking notes. "You've been through a lot," she said. "But you're not alone in this. We have resources and we're going to fight for you." Maria felt a small spark of hope ignite in her chest. For the first time, someone was offering real help. She had not been abandoned. Maria left the meeting feeling a sense of purpose that had eluded her for months. With Rachel's help, she could finally see a path forward. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings and phone calls. Maria's resolve was tested as she faced rejection after rejection, but she refused to let it break her. One night, as she sat reviewing documents, she received a call. It was from a lawyer representing a housing advocacy group. They were taking her case. "You've got a chance, Maria," the lawyer said. "We'll help you fight this eviction." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she hung up the phone. She was no longer alone. Someone was fighting with her. The battle for Maria's home wasn't easy. The legal process dragged on, with each court hearing an obstacle, adding weight to her already heavy heart. But Maria kept fighting. Every time she felt like giving up, she thought about her mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for her, and the countless nights Maria spent doing everything she could to survive. This was her chance to break free from the chains of poverty, and she would not let it slip away. On the day of the final hearing, Maria stood in the courtroom, her head held high, ready to fight for her future. The judge's decision came after what felt like an eternity. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the verdict. Finally, the judge spoke. "The eviction is overturned. The landlord must provide alternative housing options for you." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had won. The battle wasn't over, but this victory was a turning point. As she walked out of the courtroom, Maria felt a rush of relief and disbelief. She had stood up to the system and won. It was a small victory in a world that often felt stacked against her, but it was a victory nonetheless. "I did it," she whispered to herself, her eyes welling up with tears. Maria's victory in court gave her a brief taste of hope, but the battle wasn't over. Her landlord, furious at the ruling, began making her life even harder. The maintenance requests she filed went unanswered, and small inconveniences quickly became major issues in her apartment. Water leaked from the ceiling, and the heating system was broken. She couldn't afford to fix it herself, but every day felt like another obstacle placed in her path. Maria felt trapped again. The system that had already failed her once was now doing everything it could to push her back into the corner. But Maria wasn't going to give up. She called Rachel again, knowing that this would require more than just legal support. "I'm not going down without a fight," she told her. Rachel and the lawyer's office rallied around Maria, filing complaints with the local housing authority and pushing for action. But the slow-moving system refused to respond quickly enough. As the weeks passed, Maria's situation worsened. She had to deal with the rising tension between her and the other tenants, some of whom had been in similar situations for years, and were beginning to grow bitter and resentful. "Why do you think you'll make a difference?" one of them asked. "The system never changes." The doubt seeped into Maria's mind, but she pushed it away. She had come too far to let this break her. She couldn't let the system win, not now. Every time someone told her she couldn't, she felt a renewed determination to prove them wrong. She was done being invisible. One afternoon, Maria received a letter from her landlord's lawyer, threatening to take her back to court for non-compliance with her lease. Maria's heart sank. This was the system striking back, trying to crush her spirit and wear her down. She had won the first battle, but now it seemed like they were doing everything in their power to drag her back into the fight. But instead of giving in, Maria took a deep breath and turned to Rachel for guidance. "We'll fight this," Rachel assured her. "You don't have to face this alone." Maria knew the road ahead would be long and painful, but she felt the support she had been desperately seeking. The injustice was too much for one person to bear, but together they could make a stand. Maria and Rachel spent the next few weeks preparing for the court battle. They gathered evidence, reached out to other tenants who had similar issues, and filed official complaints. The legal process was grueling. Each step forward met with resistance. Maria's emotional exhaustion began to take its toll, and doubt crept in again. Was this worth it? Would anything ever change? One night, after a particularly long meeting, Maria found herself walking home in the pouring rain. The weight of the world seemed to be on her shoulders, and she felt more alone than ever. But, as she walked, she saw a small child huddling under a tree, clearly lost. Without thinking, Maria ran over, offering the child her umbrella. "Where's your mommy?" Maria asked gently. The child looked up with big, tear-filled eyes. "I don't know." Maria took her hand and led her to the nearby police station, where they were reunited with the child's mother. As Maria handed the child back, she realized something. "I'm not alone," she thought. "I've got to keep going, not just for me, but for everyone who needs a voice." The day of the hearing arrived, and Maria found herself in the courtroom once more. This time, the stakes were higher, and the atmosphere was more tense. Maria stood with Rachel, surrounded by other tenants who had come forward to support her. The landlord's legal team was ruthless, but Maria wasn't backing down. As the judge reviewed the evidence, Maria's heart pounded. This wasn't just about her apartment anymore. This was a fight for the dignity of all the tenants who had suffered in silence for too long. After what felt like hours, the judge ruled in Maria's favor, citing the landlord's neglect and the tenants' right to safe living conditions. Maria's breath caught in her throat as the courtroom erupted in applause. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had truly won, not just for herself but for everyone who had been silenced. As she walked out of the courtroom, she knew the fight wasn't over, but she had taken one crucial step toward breaking the cycle of oppression. Maria's victory in court should have felt like a turning point, but the aftermath was harder than she expected. Despite the ruling, her landlord continued to find ways to harass her. The constant barrage of small threats and setbacks wore her down. Her neighbors, once supportive, began to distance themselves, fearful of being dragged into the ongoing battle. Maria felt the weight of isolation creeping in once more. At the same time, she had to balance the fight for her home with the demands of everyday survival. She took on odd jobs to keep the bills paid, her hands sore from the physical labor, but her spirit remained unbroken. "Every day is a fight," she muttered to herself, stepping into yet another low-paying job. The system might have taken its toll on her, but Maria wasn't going to let it take her soul. One evening, after a grueling shift, Maria collapsed onto her couch. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The silence had become suffocating. She stared at the peeling walls, the broken windows, and the still air. Despite the legal victories, the place didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a cage. The sounds of the city outside only reminded her of everything she couldn't change. Maria wanted more than just survival. She wanted a life. Something beyond this constant battle. But with each passing day, the cost of resistance became clearer. She had lost friends, her savings were dwindling, and the pressure was starting to break her. She closed her eyes and tried to hold on to that initial spark of hope, but the weight of everything pressed down on her chest. "How much longer can I keep this up?" she wondered, staring into the dark. The next morning, Maria woke up to a knock at her door. Her stomach dropped as she opened it to find a bailiff with an eviction notice in hand. Despite her legal victory, the landlord had found another loophole to begin the process again. This time, Maria didn't panic. Her fight had taught her resilience, but the impact of the constant pressure was starting to show. She called Rachel immediately, her voice shaky but determined. "They're trying to push me out again." Rachel's response was swift and encouraging. "Don't worry, we'll challenge it." But Maria knew it would take weeks, even months, to settle this. As she stood at her door holding the eviction notice, a moment of doubt swept over her. How much longer could she endure this fight? Her anger, her determination, and her hope all began to blur into exhaustion. But there was no turning back now. She wasn't going to let them win. Rachel was by Maria's side through the entire process, helping her with more paperwork and contacting local officials. But with each day that passed, Maria found herself becoming more and more disillusioned with the system. It seemed that every victory was followed by 2 steps backward. The emotional toll of the fight weighed on her, and the financial strain was starting to push her to the edge. One afternoon, Maria met with a representative from a local social services organization. "There's a lot we can do, but the system is slow," the representative said, his tone sympathetic but defeated. Maria listened, trying to remain hopeful, but the harsh reality was sinking in. Despite their efforts, she couldn't help but feel that she was just one small voice in an ocean of indifference. "What am I supposed to do if this doesn't work out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The representative looked at her with understanding, but offered no real answers. It was a familiar feeling. The weight of systemic failure was suffocating. With no immediate solution in sight, Maria began considering a new path. She could fight the system, but maybe there was another way to reclaim her dignity and sense of control. She began looking into alternative housing options, community-based living arrangements, and even ways to start a business using the skills she had picked up over the years. Though it wasn't easy, Maria began to feel the faintest glimmer of possibility again. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by new plans and ideas, her face alight with determination. "I'll make it work," she said to herself. "I'll find a way." The battle was far from over, but Maria's resolve had strengthened. She wouldn't just survive, she would rise. Maria's determination paid off. She found a small local grant for women in need of housing support, something she'd never thought to look for. She applied immediately, her fingers flying over the application forms, hoping that this might be the break she had been searching for. Every step forward felt like a small victory in a battle that had already drained so much from her. But this time, she could see a light at the end of the tunnel. The grant would take time to process, but Maria wasn't just waiting. She started making calls, reaching out to local community groups for temporary housing, and even looked into vocational programs that might help her build a future outside the constant grind. Every new idea felt like a lifeline, something that could help her build a future that was her own. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was planning. A week later, Maria received the call that would change everything. The grant had been approved. She could hardly believe it as she listened to the woman on the other end of the line. For the first time in months, Maria allowed herself to feel something close to joy. She had done it. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a foothold, a chance to breathe. "This is just the beginning," Maria told herself, her voice barely above a whisper. But she knew this was only one step. With the grant money, she could finally pay her rent and repair some of the damages in her apartment. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. And with that start, Maria finally felt like she could regain control of her life. Maria's newfound sense of hope was contagious. She found herself sharing the good news with Rachel, who celebrated the victory with her. But Rachel's face grew serious as she offered some important advice. "This grant is just a temporary fix," she warned. "The system will try to knock you down again. You've got to keep building for the long haul." Maria nodded, her smile faltering for a moment. She understood what Rachel meant. This was just the beginning of a long road. But for the first time, Maria felt like she could face it. She wasn't alone anymore. She had eyes, a plan, and an inner strength that had been tested time and time again. "I'll keep going," Maria promised herself. "I won't let this system define me." Despite the small victories, Maria was still faced with the harsh realities of the system. The following weeks brought challenges that felt like setbacks. A medical emergency drained her savings, and her landlord attempted another round of intimidation. Yet, this time, Maria stood firm. She reached out to her new contacts in the community, and together, they pushed back against the intimidation. Maria was no longer afraid to speak up or ask for help. With the support of people who understood her struggle, she found the courage to stand her ground. The sense of empowerment she felt was a stark contrast to the fear she had lived with for so long. As she walked through the city streets one evening, Maria looked up at the sky and whispered to herself, "I will not be broken." One rainy afternoon, Maria took a walk to clear her head. She passed the same building that had once been her source of anxiety, the place where she had been harassed and pushed to the brink. But now, as she looked up at it, she saw something different. She had survived it. She had faced the challenges and come out stronger. The rain fell in steady sheets, but Maria didn't mind. In that moment, the world seemed quieter, as if the storm outside mirrored the peace she had found within herself. She realized that her journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about growth, self-respect, and the strength to push forward. She wasn't done yet, but she was on the path to something better. Maria woke up to the sound of pounding rain, the sky dark and oppressive outside her window. As she looked around her small apartment, the weight of her circumstances settled heavily on her shoulders. Despite the progress she had made, the financial strain was still crushing. Her grant had been a temporary relief, but it wasn't enough to change the long-term reality. Her rent was due again, and there was no money left to cover it. The fear of eviction loomed over her like a dark cloud, but what hurt more was the feeling of hopelessness creeping back in. Fight was taking everything from her. Her time, her energy, her mental health. But even as doubt gnawed at her, Maria knew she couldn't give up. She had come too far to let the system swallow her whole. "There's always a way," she whispered to herself, though the words felt more like a desperate prayer than a promise. As Maria walked to work that day, she noticed the city streets were full of people rushing to escape the rain. She walked through them, feeling small and invisible. But something shifted in her that afternoon. As she walked, she thought about all the people she had met along the way, those who had tried to break her, and those who had helped her stand tall. She remembered the smile of the lawyer who took her case, the warmth of Rachel's encouragement, and even the support of the unlikely allies she'd found in the community. Maria had never been truly alone. There was a collective strength in all of them, and she had tapped into it. As she entered the cafe where she worked, she found herself more determined than ever. She was ready to make her next move, no matter how hard it would be. "I won't let them win," she thought, stepping behind the counter to start her shift. A few days later, Maria received another letter from her landlord. Her heart sank as she opened it, only to find that they were pushing for another court date. This time they wanted to move forward with eviction proceedings, citing unpaid rent. Maria's fingers trembled as she read the letter, but instead of panic she felt something else: anger. This time, the fight wasn't just about her home. It was about taking a stand against a system that treated people like her as disposable. Maria knew she couldn't do this alone anymore. She reached out to Rachel and the activist group for additional support, preparing herself for a new fight. "They think they can break me," she muttered, "but they're wrong." The next few weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Maria went to court again, this time with more allies by her side. Rachel was there, as was a group of tenants from her building who had joined the fight. The legal team representing her landlord was fierce, trying to tear apart every argument they made. Maria's nerves were frayed, but she stood her ground. Every word they said to discredit her was another push forward for Maria. When the judge finally ruled in her favor, her legs almost gave out beneath her. She had won again, but this victory felt different. It was hard-won, and the road had been long. "It's not over," she thought, "but this is one more step." After the court ruling, Maria walked out of the building, the weight of the past few months slowly lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't naive enough to think everything was fixed. The battle was ongoing, and there were still many hurdles ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was no longer fighting just to survive. She was fighting for her future. As she walked home that evening, Maria took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. She had come so far, and she wasn't stopping now. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a fighter. "This is just the beginning," she thought, a smile creeping onto her lips. "I'm going to keep going." Maria woke up to a new day, the sun streaming through the cracked blinds in her small apartment. The fight had been long and hard, but she was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The grant had helped, the legal victories were stacking up, and for the first time in months, Maria felt a real sense of stability. But stability was fragile, and Maria knew it. She could never rest on her laurels. She still had bills to pay, her living situation was far from ideal, and there were always new hurdles waiting to be crossed. But she also knew that the same strength that had gotten her this far would carry her through whatever came next. "This is my life," she said softly, looking out the window at the city beyond. "I'm in control now." That afternoon, Maria received a call from Rachel. There was more news. Her landlord had sold the building. The new owner wasn't interested in evicting her, and as long as she continued paying rent, she would be allowed to stay. The relief washed over Maria like a wave, but she also knew better than to trust the system completely. The landlord's indifference had been the least of her battles. This was a small win, but not a permanent one. I'm grateful, Maria thought, but I can't stop now. The victory wasn't just about her apartment anymore. It was about securing a future where she could live without fear of being knocked down again. She made a vow to herself. No matter what, she would keep pushing forward. Maria knew that the battle against the system wasn't over. It wasn't just about fighting for her home, it was about fighting for her future and the future of others like her. She began working with local organizations, advocating for housing rights and affordable living for the underserved. Every story she heard fueled her resolve. She saw herself in every person she met, the families struggling to make ends meet, the individuals fighting against eviction, and the children who had no choice but to grow up in the same cycle of poverty. But she also saw hope. Together they could push back against a system that had only been designed to hold them down. Maria became a voice for change, using the strength she had gained through her own struggles to help others find their own. In the months that followed, Maria's life began to stabilize. She found a steady job and continued working on her advocacy efforts. The weight of daily survival had lifted, and for the first time in years, Maria felt like she had a future. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. She had learned the importance of self-worth, the power of community, and the necessity of perseverance. Maria wasn't just the girl who fought to keep her apartment. She was a leader, a voice, and an advocate. I may not have all the answers, Maria reflected one evening, but I have a purpose now, and I'm not backing down. As Maria stood on the steps of a local government building, speaking to a group of activists, she realized just how far she had come. The woman who had once been crushed by the weight of eviction notices and bureaucracy was now standing as an equal, fighting for others who still had no voice. I fought for my survival, she said, addressing the crowd. And now I'm fighting for yours. Her words echoed through the crowd, and Maria felt a wave of connection and unity. She wasn't just one person anymore. She was part of something bigger, something that could bring real change. The system had tried to break her, but it had only made her stronger. We're not alone in this fight, she concluded, her voice strong and unwavering. Together, we will rise.